Hello, and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is John Rose, and today I'm going to take a closer look at salts that heal and salts that kill. Yes, sodium, one of the most controversial topics there is around. People have been begging me to talk about this subject for a long time, and I've sort of put it off because there is so much controversy on this subject. I've been studying this subject for quite some time. I've got a pretty good sized file on it. A good part of my file are debates on raw food message boards as to whether or not there's any logic to consuming salt. On one end, of course, we have people that say no, and others saying yes, we do. And there is a difference when it comes to salt. There is refined salt, very heavily processed, heated, all the minerals are stripped away. And then there's unrefined salts that we find in Celtic Sea Salts, Himalayan salt, and real salt. And we'll talk a little bit more about those in just a little bit. But for now, I want to talk a little bit about the controversy, about what people are saying on both sides of this, to see if we can make some sense out of it. I remember listening to Charlotte, Dr. Max Gerson's daughter, Charlotte Gerson, when she came here in Houston and gave a seminar here in the early 90s. And obviously the topic of salt came up because it's a whole chapter in Max Gerson's book. He was very against salt, and of course he was referring to the refined salt for a good reason. His rationale was it's sodium and chloride, and on the periodic table, sodium and potassium are in the same column, so therefore the sodium can displace the potassium. He believed that all chronic disease begins with a loss of potassium on an intracellular level. And then the chloride is in the same column as our iodine, however you want to pronounce it, and that it too can displace that in our body also. And for that reason, not to use it. Now, Charlotte, when I saw her speak, she was probably around 70 or so. And she says, I haven't been consuming any salt for 60 years, and my blood tests are just fine. I have no problems. So that makes you wonder if maybe there is a link to why she broke her hip several years back when she turned 90. Of course, she went straight on to a bunch of green vegetable juices and healed it right back up. Didn't die like a lot of people who have that injury at her age. And again, another group of people who will really say that we shouldn't consume the salt would be those natural hygienists. And of course, they're really quick to poo-poo anything that doesn't seem to make sense naturally. And I can sort of understand this in many ways. If you think about it, I always like to, when something like this comes up that's real confusing, I always try to rely on my sense of logic and try to think of, well, what would we have done long ago? Would it have made sense that we would be getting salt somehow? And then you realize there's a lot of different sources for salt. There are natural salt licks in nature. There are salt marshes, brine water that occur in nature. And they say elephants will even risk their own life to go get salt in salt caves. Now, a lot of people deny this, but yet we've documented it. We see this happen. And yet not all elephants are going around to the salt licks, are they? Well, this was a lot like geophagy, and I did a video a while back on clay eating and urine drinking and why do dogs eat their own poop and things like that. Well, when our body's deficient, we'll eat dirt if we have to. And that's what a lot of animals will do in nature. They will eat dirt. And when you look at a natural salt lick, it's different than an artificial salt lick. So it's a whole different thing when you look at the two. And what one group of people will say, well, it's not natural, they're just addicted to it, they shouldn't do it. But yet, if the soil the elephants are consuming, for example, remember, elephants are smart. They got this one female elephant that's been around longer than anybody, and she knows right where to go at the right times of year to eat the food at the right places. And I'm sure wherever those caves were at, on the way, they were going through soil that wasn't very fertile and had a good reason to perhaps supplement it. That's one possible explanation. And I can't help but think that, and I wasn't going to digress there at this point, but I'm going to do it anyway, when it comes to the addictive point of view and why an animal might do something you would think would be detrimental, horses will intentionally stick their head in a hornet's nest knowing quite well they're going to get stung, but they do it because they've done it before by accident and they realize they got a high from it, from producing all those endorphins. So maybe animals in nature are just bored and they want to go lick some salt. But there's other places, and people say, well, that can't be the rationale because these salt licks aren't everywhere, but there are salt marshes everywhere. Salt fields are other ways for animals to get salt water, to get salt that way if they need it. And then you hear a great story that I heard not too long ago by Karen Becker, Dr. Karen Becker, and she was interviewing Dr. Barbara Royal. And she's a veterinarian. They both are veterinarians. And I like Dr. Becker because she understands raw food. She understands this species-specific diet. And that's where you have to start when it comes to feeding animals. But she was talking to this woman, and she was talking about the problems that they were having with camels in the zoo. That they were coming down with arthritis in their legs. They're becoming arthritic. And she was, at this time when this happened, she didn't know what to do. In the zoo, it's coming down when they're 15 to 18, and yet camels in nature live to be 40. They never become arthritic the whole time. So when this first happened to her, this is before Google was around, and she didn't have a whole lot of resources to look into. So she went down to the library and did as much reading as she could. She found out there was a salt deficiency. And they were so drastically deficient in salt that even salt licks themselves would not help solve that problem. But by adding a lot of salt to their diet, it solved that problem. So, why do people think salt's so bad? Do they understand there's a difference between salts that heal and salts that kill? If it's heated, what is it, 5,000 degrees? I think it's some insane number. I can't remember. I should have looked that up before I came out, but that's numbers etched in my mind somehow. But all the minerals are stripped away. But then when we look at the Celtic sea salts and the Himalayan salts and the real salts, those have not been processed. Now, the first two I just mentioned claim to have 84 trace minerals, and the real salt says we only have 60. And the 24 they say they have, they really shouldn't say it. It's a marketing ploy, because 24 of those have 0.00001%. So when you have a lab test coming back and it says 0.00001% gold, they're really saying there's no gold in there at all. So it's really deceptive to add those other 24 minerals onto that. So if you look at it that way, then they're all comparable, except Celtic sea salt is processed, harvested from the ocean, where the other two are mined. And what makes Celtic sea salt so unique, if what I read is true long ago, Celtic sea salt is still bound to phytoplankton. And these microalgae are able to transmute this inorganic, non-living mineral into an organic living mineral. Keeping in mind there's more than one definition of organic I've mentioned before. A chemist is going to get a little anal on us and say that's not organic, there's no carbon atom attached to it. Well, there's another definition. It just means, is it coming from a life force? And in this case it is. The microalgae transform the Celtic sea salt into a living mineral, if that's true. I only read that from one source a couple decades ago. But that makes an interesting point, doesn't it? Now, if we look at the Himalayan salt, it's harvested in Pakistan at the bottom of the Himalayan mountains, ideally. It's 5,000 feet down. Unfortunately, and because it's packed down there below, it's structured and it's better quality, it's more impure. And for what I've read, that a lot of them are harvesting it up closer to the top of the mountain where there's more impurities and it's not as structured, so it's not as healthy. And of course, both those items are pretty pricey here in America, coming from the Celtic sea salt's coming from northwest shore of France, and then the Himalayas in Pakistan. But here in America, we have real salt coming from Redmond, Utah. And it's mined from an ancient sea, just like the Himalaya salt is, except this is only 500 years old. And it's much cheaper. It has a little bit less sulfur than the other two salts, so it has a little bit of a sweeter taste. Now, do we need to add salt to our diet? Can we go without ever consuming any salt and be okay? Well, it really depends, doesn't it? There may be cases in which it might be beneficial for us to add a little salt if we're not consuming enough structured water, by consuming enough fruits and vegetables. We might be able to benefit by absorbing and utilizing salt better, or water better when it has salt in it, if it's not structured water. But the other reason why anybody would want to use salt in today's time realizing that wasn't that long ago, salt was a big commodity. We used it like gold and wheat. It was used as in barter. It was that valuable back then. And the reason why it's valuable back then is the reason why it could be useful today. It's not easy to eat a raw vegan diet or species-specific diet in today's world completely. A lot of us might have to rely on using recipes or making salads and having dressings and things like that. And most of the food we're going to be eating should be pleasing enough to our taste. But if we're going to make a salad dressing recipe, for example, as I do and as I pointed out in my video, there are 4 or 5 flavors we want to make sure we mix. Now, we're making a salad, we already have the 5th flavor, that's the bitter, the pungent. Otherwise, there are 4 main flavors that go into making of any gourmet recipe. We've got the sugar, the sour, the fat, and the salt. So when you're making a recipe to make everything taste yummy, salt is part of that mixture. So that's how I use it. I don't go out of my way if I'm not going to have a big salad and not have some sort of salad dressing to say I better make sure I add some salt to my diet. Because if we just consume nothing but fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds, we'll get somewhere between 400 and 600 milligrams of salt a day. There really is no RDA to speak of for sodium. The rule of thumb when it comes to salt is to keep the number equal to the calories. So if you're having 3,000 calories, you don't want more than 3,000 milligrams of salt. That's not much salt. 5,000 milligrams is 1 teaspoon. So that kind of puts things in perspective. It's not a whole lot of salt to get up to that bare minimum number. And of course, there's a difference between salts that heal and salts that kill. Refined salt's going to be bad no matter what. The only big difference that you have in that is a supplement with iodine or iodine. You're really not getting any iodine or iodine in your refined salt. There's not that much in there. But we do get a host of other trace minerals, up to 60 trace minerals. And if you are concerned when you go into a website like Chronometer or Fit Day, you put in your calories and they'll tell you what you're doing. As long as you eat a wide variety of fruits and vegetables, a couple pounds of leafy greens a day, you'll have no problems reaching those numbers. The only thing that's going to look low is going to be that sodium number. So if that is of concern to you, then we can go to those 3 types of salt that I mentioned. Stay away from the table salt. We know that's bad. And hopefully this video will spark some interesting conversations and y'all can share what you've heard and read on this subject. How many of y'all ever heard that Celtic sea salt is still bound to phytoplankton, therefore making it organic? Can we eat rocks? Can we eat dirt and get minerals from that? No, we got to have a plant bring it to life, don't we? Well, what happens if we don't have a plant bring it to life? Can we still use it? Apparently so. We just suffer because it's no longer living. It's not going to have a living enzyme to it. And supposedly that means we're going to have to sacrifice our own metabolic enzyme pool to utilize that mineral. It makes sense to me, folks. We should be getting all those things we need from our food. And because it's so hard to embrace a raw vegan diet, we might need to turn to certain recipes. And if that's the case, don't be afraid, I don't think, of using a little bit of unrefined salt. And what else can I say about it? A lot of controversy over it, isn't it? There's a reason why I put off doing this video. I've walked the fence for a long time because there's what looks like good arguments on both sides. But when you see the results that Barbara Royal got with the camels, you can't help but scratch your head and say, well, wait a second. Is there something missing in the life of a camel in a zoo? Well, it probably is. Sure, it's not getting near enough exercise. There's probably other things that have been sterilized in their environment that may be affecting them. Regardless of the case, supplemental sodium did the trick for them. So be afraid of those salts that kill, but don't be afraid of the salts that can heal. And when you can do that and feel good about it, you're in for a treat.